Hello, Liverpool fans. Welcome back to the Liverpool Reaction, an American LFC podcast. Coach Ralph and I are very excited to bring you this podcast. From games to players to club news, we cover everything LFC. You can find us on every platform, and we are even on YouTube. Please take the time to follow the podcast. That way you are aware every time a new podcast is up. Thank you for listening. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Liverpool Reaction, an American LFC podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Salim, and I'm joined by my other co-host, Coach Ralph. Coach, good morning.
Hey,
How are you?
how are you today, Salim?
I'm doing well. We have an interesting topic to discuss today, and it kind of revolves around what happened on Saturday when Real Madrid beat Borussia Dortmund 2-0 for their 15th Champions League win. I mean, they are the boogeyman when it comes to Champions Leagues, and impressive that how dominant they have been. And we are going to discuss today the Champions League history of Liverpool, and they have 10 appearances with 6 wins and 4 losses, pardon me. And we're going to discuss them. I remember 4 or 5 of them, and there's some before my time that Coach is going to talk about, and Coach even went to one. So it's going to be very interesting talk about Champions League and very relevant considering what happened this past weekend. Coach, where would you like to start? We have so much to talk about.
At the beginning, I suppose would be the logical place because I am old enough to remember their very first European campaign in 64, 65. And I believe when we did the podcast, thinking back over the years, I talked about the Inter Milan game in the semi-final, which was an incredible night, and then the controversy of the second leg. And really, it was another 10 years or so before Liverpool finally made it to a final. So I think that should be our starting point, 1977, in fact.
That's right, yeah, in Rome against Mönchengladbach. I hope I said that right.
Yeah, Borussia Mönchengladbach, who at that time were the premier team in Germany. Bayern Munich was one of several teams that were usually in contention every year, but it was more of an open field at that time, German football.
Yeah, and what's interesting about these games, including the 1965 game against Inter Milan, you can actually find these online. I was very pleased with the UEFA website that a lot of these games you can actually watch the highlights, which is very cool. Even the old footage, as iffy as it was kind of cool to kind of go back in time and see these games. I remember you mentioned Saint Etienne. I think, what was that 78?
No, it was the same year. It was the same year.
Yeah. So there was it's very interesting that you can still look at this footage. But yeah, the game against Borussia Mönchengladbach, 3-1 victory for the Reds. And the one thing that kind of stood out to me when I was watching these highlights was the second goal, the free kick from the training ground.
Actually, it was a corner kick. Salim.
Okay, I might be thinking of another one. Oh, I might be thinking of the Inter Milan game or the Saint Etienne game. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, Coach, why don't you dive into it? Because I just watched highlights, and you had you watched it and know more about it than I do. So go ahead, Coach.
Well, I relate all these finals to where I was at the time, what I was doing, so on and so forth. And in 1977, believe it or not, I was a law student, and I was at Cardiff University in Wales.
Mm-hmm.
And it was right around the time of year when we had finals and what have you. So obviously taking a break to watch the big game. It was the first time Liverpool had made it to a European Cup final. Few years earlier, they'd won the UEFA Cup on 2 occasions. So this was like the next step for the club. And my father, who at the time was a commentator for the hospital broadcasting service, had gone over to Rome as a guest of the club. And there's many documentaries, many of which I believe are on YouTube, about how Liverpool fans went to Rome. There's some incredible stories about, selling cars and selling this and selling that just so that they could afford the travel going over to see the game played and what have you. Wow. And the stadium, the Olympic Stadium in Rome, I believe was where it was played, was totally dominated by the Liverpool fans. And I think that colours in, a lot of the history looking back at that night. It wasn't just that Liverpool won. It was just the occasion, everything that went along with it. And it was perhaps summed up best by Liverpool fans in Merseyside. It's well known for its sense of humour. Besides footballers and musicians, Merseyside has also produced a number of top comedians in the UK over the years. And there's one very, very famous banner which was unfurled in Rome that night, and it referred to Liverpool's Welsh left back, Joey Jones. And Joey was quite a character, actually. I would describe him as a cult hero. Probably wasn't the most skillful fullback that Liverpool had ever had, but he was just one of those guys that the crowd related to because he was passionate and he just got into it so much. And the banner referred to some of the previous games that Liverpool had played in that campaign. Firstly, against the French team, Saint Etienne, very, very famous game that we talked about before. Mm-hmm. In the semi-final, Liverpool played a Swiss team, FC Zurich. Obviously, they advanced from there. So the banner read, and it refers to Joey Jones, Joey ate the frog's legs, referring to Saint Etienne, made the Swiss roll, referring to FC Zurich. Now he's munching Gladbach, which obviously is a play on words of the Borussia team. So these are the things that fans like myself remember, not just about the game, but about the occasion. And obviously it was a great night for Liverpool Football Club as they won their first trophy. And they took the lead in the first half. And I believe Steve Highway was involved. He dished the ball off to Terry McDermott, who was a local lad, and Terry found the corner of the net. So 1-0 at halftime. Everything was going great. And then out of nowhere, Mönchengladbach had a Danish player, Alan Simonsen, who I believe at the time was the European Footballer of the Year. I mean, he was a great player. And somebody made an error. I can't remember who the player was, but there was an error at the back. And all of a sudden, Simonsen was through on the left-hand side of the field. And it was a difficult angle, but it was a vicious shot that found the top corner of the net. And all of a sudden, things were a bit shaky because Liverpool, up until that time, had been on top. And it was kind of poetic, as it were, that the way that the winning goal occurred was actually from a corner kick. And Tommy Smith, who was a veteran player, there was himself and there was Ian Callaghan from the Bill Shankly years. And they kind of stayed through from the early 60s all the way through to 77. He got forward and he headed the ball in at the near post. And Tommy Smith actually did score a few goals for Liverpool, but they were usually either penalty kicks or shots from long range because he was a defender. Mm. So for him to get forward, he wasn't a big lad. Glancing header at the near post, it was just... I don't know, there was something poetic about it, linking the Bill Shankly years to what was happening in the 70s. under Bob Paisley, and a great night.
Yeah, the highlights that I watched and were very interesting. Generally speaking, it seems to me there was a lot more shots from distance than I see nowadays. But it's just cool to see that there's still footage out there for it. And the couple things that I kind of noticed when I was really kind of doing a deep dive in this was that there are some dominant teams, big teams that have a lot of Champions League wins, and Liverpool having 6 is in third place, tied with, I believe, Bayern, as AC Milan has 7, and like we talked about, Madrid is 15. So very, very cool stuff. The next one was in London at Old Wembley against Club Brugge. And Coach, was that the one you were at?
Yep. Yeah, I was at that final, and again, I was still a law student and drove over on the day. See, I can't remember where I stayed that night. I think I went to a friend's in London, but drove over on the day. I was there very early, and it was before the gates opened at Wembley Stadium. And one thing that I remember was there were already Liverpool fans climbing up the wall to get into the stadium. Didn't have tickets. So I remember that quite vividly. And the biggest memory of the game, it wasn't a great game, to be honest with you. Again, it's in the era where it was a lot more open European football. So as with the previous years, you had a Swiss team going to the semi-finals. FC Bruges were a Belgian team, and Liverpool had actually beaten them in the UEFA Cup final in '76, a couple of years earlier. So it was kind of renewing a rivalry. And the thing that sticks out in my mind about the game was the stadium, which held 100,000 fans that night. I would say about 98,000 of them were Liverpool fans, which was incredible, because usually when there's a cup final, you'll maybe get fans from one team at one end, fans from the other team at the other end. But this Wembley that night was totally red and white. And from a Liverpool perspective, the atmosphere was probably unparalleled because of such dominant support. And as I say, the game wasn't great because Bruges were very much the underdogs, and they, in modern terminology, parked the bus. They played defensively. Having said that, Liverpool's winning goal was one of the best probably in Europe or of any time. And it kind of signaled the changing of the guard, because when Liverpool won in '77, it was the final game of Kevin Keegan. And it was maybe the first time, or probably after the leaving of Bill Shankly, we kind of get these occasions, and we're going through one now where Jurgen Klopp has left, and everybody says, ex-player or ex-manager has left, how will we go on type thing? And the answer is quite simple. Liverpool football club's been in existence for over 100 years, and everything goes on. So Kevin Keegan was kind of the star player, and he had left after the final against Mönchengladbach. And who did Liverpool go and sign? They signed Kenny Dalglish, who many people feel is the greatest player that Liverpool has ever had on its books. And it was Dalglish that scored the winning goal that night. He was put through by Graham Souness. Mm-hmm. And as the keeper came out, he delicately chips the ball over him and into the far corner. And then he actually ran down to the part of the ground where I was standing and celebrated in front of us. So obviously that was a great memory of mine.
What an experience. Yeah, the dink over the goalie was beautiful. It's
Oh yeah. Kenny Dalglish was a great player, truly was.
With that being old Wembley, have you been to the new Wembley Stadium?
As yet, no. As yet, no. So we'll have to see if that happens in the near future. But yeah, it was a great stadium, the old Wembley.
Yeah.
But as with everything, as with everything in life, everything changes, and so I understand that the new Wembley is very much state of the art.
So the next one was 80-81 season in Paris versus Real Madrid. And this was Alan Kennedy who scored the goal, and he just kind of made his way down the left side and then buried it. And it was again very cool to see. What do you remember from that game?
Well, again, it wasn't a great game. I had moved from Cardiff. I was in Sheffield and had opted not to take the legal route. I was already into coaching and had taken my licenses. And I decided that the best way to enhance that was to qualify as a teacher. So I was just finishing up at Sheffield University, a teacher training year. But I was back in Liverpool, so I'm not quite sure why I was back in Liverpool. Maybe it was during the school holiday or something like that. But I was back in Liverpool. Wasn't a great game. And then out of nowhere in the last 10 minutes, Liverpool scored the winning goal. And Real Madrid at the time, they kind of went through a period where when the European Cup started and it was kind of wasn't widely adopted, as it were, they totally dominated.
Yeah, they won the first five.
They won the first five, and what they did basically was they, how would I put it? They were the first club on a major scale to bring in star players from other countries. So perhaps the two star players at the time. One was the Hungarian. One was the Hungarian Ferenc Puskás, and then from Argentina they had Alfredo Di Stefano, and so they dominated. And then they had a period up until what people refer to as the Galactico era, when they kind of went all out to buy in all these big name players. And so if you look at Madrid in 81, like they still had a very good team, but they only had two foreign players on the team. Uli Stielicke, the German, who was a top player of that era for West Germany. And then they had an English player, Laurie Cunningham. And Cunningham is probably one of the players in English football that maybe is a great unfulfilled talent. I think he had more success. He started his career with West Bromwich Albion in England, and I think he did well, but he was more of a player. He was a very fine, skilled, maybe not physical player. I think English football was maybe a little bit too physical for him. So he went abroad and he played in Madrid, so he was obviously good. But the team overall was primarily, it was all Spanish, apart from those two. So it was kind of an era when they weren't like the formative years of the European Cup or kind of the modern era of what they now call the Champions League. And Liverpool's goal basically came out of nothing, where I think there might have been a throw-in. And then Alan Kennedy, who was the left back, he had actually taken over from Joey Jones a couple of years earlier. He's kind of free coming down the touchline, bearing in towards the goal. And I think I've heard interviews over the years where the other players were kind of encouraging him to cross it or pass it. And instead he just blasts the ball and it goes past the Madrid goalkeeper. I don't know whether he was expecting it or not, but he really hit it. And it just goes in at the near post, and that was enough to get Liverpool their third European Cup trophy.
Yeah, it's very interesting also the amount of games they played back then to now what Champions League has turned into. I think there was maybe 7 games, something along those lines, versus, it's almost...
Well, it was a knockout tournament. It was a knockout tournament.
Yeah, there's no group stage.
Yeah, there's nothing like that. And as I say, it was a lot more open than it is now, because during that era, I can remember Liverpool losing to teams from Bulgaria. They lost to, I saw them play Dynamo Tbilisi, who at that time was part of the USSR, but was a Georgian team, very good team, by the way. So it was a lot different to how it is now, where really money has taken over the game.
Yeah. And then the next one, 83-84 in Rome again. It ends at 1-1, extra time, and then penalty kicks. They win 4-2 in penalty kicks. So how about that one? Because I can speak about the next couple, but I was 4 years old on that one. So can you talk us through that one?
So yeah, by 1984, that was just after I'd moved to America, which was August of 1983 was when I came over to take a master's degree in Pennsylvania at Westchester University. And I just completed the first year, and I was back in England. I watched the game when I was home. And actually, some people say that the final that year was possibly Liverpool's greatest accomplishment, because they returned to Rome, to the Olympic Stadium. But the difference this time was they were playing against Roma. This was their home stadium. I don't know if UEFA would allow things to happen like that these days. I'm not sure. And Roma had actually had a very controversial semi-final where they came from behind to beat the Scottish champions Dundee United. So there was a lot of controversy behind that. Anyway, so the Liverpool's playing away, and they scored pretty early on. And I think they had a goal disallowed right afterwards as well. And they were playing very, very well. And if my memory serves me correctly, I think Roma equalised just before half-time. But my memory of the game is that overall Liverpool played well. And, of course, it went into penalty kicks. And the penalty kicks are immortalised by Liverpool goalkeeper at the time, Bruce Grobbelaar. And I don't know if you saw the video online, the penalty shootout at all.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so it's immortalised by the fact that as the Italian team are taking their penalty kicks, Grobbelaar is on the line, and I don't know how to put it, but he's acting as though he's drunk. He's kind of wobbling on his legs.
It reminded me of Jersey Dudek.
Well, Dudek later copies it.
Yeah.
and so I think that is the thing that people always remember most about the final was Grobbelaar and his antics.
Yeah, it was like spaghetti legs. Like he was just kind of like wiggling his legs around.
Because whatever he was doing had its effect. It certainly had its effect because Liverpool, I can't remember how many players missed their penalties for Roma.
Roma missed 3. It was 4-2.
Oh, did they miss?
Yeah, it was 4-2 Liverpool, and Liverpool didn't have to. I guess maybe even just 2.
It was 2 or 3.
Yeah.
It was 2 or 3. So whatever Grobbelaar was doing had its effect, and so it came down to Alan Kennedy again.
Yeah.
To take the winning penalty. So I think his name's going to be etched in Liverpool history because he converted the penalty. And so out of Liverpool's 6 European Cup winning campaigns, he has scored the winning goal in 2 of them, which is, I think, also unique for a left full back as well.
I found one thing that was kind of interesting of this one, Stevie Nicol, who is on ESPN FC, obviously a clear Liverpool fan, and he missed his first penalty on this one. And that's the first time I heard his name actually pop up, again, doing a deep dive in this stuff. And it was so interesting to see, like, oh, I know that guy. He's on ESPN FC all the time, talking about Liverpool and all the other European games and English football. So that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I think Nicol was in maybe his first or his second season, and he came on in the game as a substitute. And actually, he was a great player for Liverpool. I mean, he is in my all-time team for the club. He was a fantastic fullback, and he could get forward and score. And I can't remember what the story is. He ended up taking the first penalty, which was kind of unusual because, as I say, he was a young player and he wasn't established in the first team. He came on as a sub that night. And I can't remember what the reason was that he took the penalty. I'm not sure that it was exactly planned. The way that they plan the game now, everything is meticulous. And I don't think in that era it was quite the same way, because I think I've heard that some of the players question why he was taking the first penalty. But irrespective of that, he took it and he missed. And so that seemed to hand the advantage to the Italian team. But of course, Bruce Grobbelaar had other ideas, as we all know, with hindsight, and Liverpool triumph for their 4th title.
And the highlights show the Italians just completely missing the goal, like shooting over the goal.
Oh,
yeah.
Right,
So
right,
it wasn't even that the goalie made incredible saves. He just kind of got in their head and they lifted theirs right over the crossbar, and I mean, gone. And they weren't even close, the 2 that I saw.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really fascinating. So at that point we're 4-0 in European cups, and the first loss is in Brussels against Juventus, which was the following year, and it was Michel Platini, a penalty kick goal, that was the difference. And at that point, 4 wins, 1 loss, pretty good outcome as far as percentages and winning titles. And then
right.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, that game's always going to be overshadowed by the disaster that went along with it, the Heysel disaster, where basically the wall collapsed, and English football at the time was hounded by this fan problems and what have you, football hooliganism. Liverpool actually weren't particularly well known for it, but that was kind of the final straw, and English football teams were banned for a number of years after that. And the game itself, I saw that in the USA. I had just completed my master's degree, and I watched it in the USA. And in fact, the loss was a penalty goal by Platini, which arguably the foul was outside the area. But I don't think the players particularly cared at that point because of what had happened prior to the game, and obviously a sad day in the history of the football club.
Coach, that's not the Hillsborough disaster, right? That's a different one.
The Hillsborough disaster was 4 years later, okay. and that was very different. But they kind of came in close proximity, and I suppose when we look back now, wasn't just football hooliganism, but stadiums in Europe were aging and decrepit, and there were issues around the way that crowds were controlled. Hillsborough is in Sheffield, and I, after I finished my teacher training, I actually taught in Sheffield, and I used to drive past Hillsborough every day. And at that time, Hillsborough was traditionally used for the cup semi-finals just about every year. And there were lots of issues, as I say, aging stadiums, crowd control issues, because they had barriers around the field. And after that time, that is when the game really began to change in terms of many of the infrastructure issues. Stadiums became all seated, modernized, and I guess those two Liverpool games were major factors in it.
There's a very interesting documentary about that, and the documentary kind of talks about the hooliganism kind of thought that happened behind it versus the gross mismanagement by the people that were in charge of letting people in. It's really, really interesting. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a 30 for 30.
Oh, well, you're talking about Hillsborough now. Yes. Yeah. I mean, like that's in many respects, some of the issues around that haven't been settled to this day, and it's an ongoing campaign. So yeah, it was a tragedy. But it was a major factor in why the game has changed since 19. Oh, sorry. What year was it? 1989. Yeah. Hillsborough, wasn't it? Yeah, 89.
Do you remember the game in Brussels versus Juventus?
Oh yes, yeah. As I said, I watched it. At that time, very very few games were shown on television, and if my memory is correct, I'm not quite sure about this point. I think the only way that we could watch it was on Spanish television. I think it was on Univision. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was an English commentary, but I'm not entirely sure about that. As I say, very, very few games were shown live on US TV.
Okay. Well, this brings us to a little barren run here. Nothing in the 90s, and then Istanbul in 2004-2005 season against AC Milan. And when you look at that team from AC Milan, I mean, it's literally superstars all over the place. That game even means that much more when you look back at that AC Milan team. You have Maldini, you got Nesta, you got early Kaká, you got Seedorf, Andrea Pirlo. I mean, the Crespo, Shevchenko. I mean, these are well-known superstars of soccer, and the fact that they went down 3-0 at halftime and then came back in a 6-minute span, score 3 goals, and then Jerzy Dudek doing the spaghetti legs and just having the AC Milan team just in shambles in the penalty kicks was incredible. Coach, funny story about this one, because this is where I can kind of start speaking to where I was. So I was living in Tampa. I was at the University of South Florida, and I decided to go golfing instead of watching this game. So I'm golfing, and I'm getting these phone calls from a buddy of mine saying, hey, they're down 3-0. And I was like, well, I'm glad I went golfing. And then I think 54th minute, Gerrard scores a header, and then Smeeser scores, and then Alonso on the penalty kick. So I'm getting literally in a span of 6 minutes, like phone calls every couple minutes. And now I'm really thinking, what did I do? I get the phone call that they win in penalty kicks, and I rush back home. And thank God, this was one of those instant classics where ESPN at the time just replayed the game right after it. And I watched the full game again, like thinking, even though I knew the result, I just could not believe it. And watching it, even though I knew what happened, was just unbelievable.
Right. The backdrop to the game is obviously the European Cup has become the Champions League, and it's what was it? It would be 20 years since Liverpool had last played in a European Cup final.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the squads now of both teams, obviously Milan had all these superstars, with the 3 Brazilians and top Italian players, and then you got Seedorf, Crespo, Shevchenko, all these big name players. Liverpool's team, out of the 18 players, only had 3 English players, which is kind of wow. 20 years, that is one big difference from when they played Juventus. So they had quite a wide range of players, maybe not the superstars of Milan, but a very, very different setup. And it's a game that's been immortalized since in so many different ways. There've been not just documentaries about it, but there've been plays. I think there's even been a musical about it. There's been just so much conjecture because the first half, Liverpool are just totally overrun and outplayed by Milan, which leads to, a 3-0 loss. And I mean, watching at the time, it really was a question of how many goals is this going to be? And Rafa Benitez, who I think is a very astute tactical manager, had made a mistake. And that was he had decided not to play or not to start Dieter Hamann. Because the one thing that Dieter Hamann could do was, he'd sit in the central midfield. He was an out-and-out defensive midfielder. Kaká was running riot. And up against him, you had Steven Gerrard and Xabi Alonso, who were 2 world-class players, but their strengths were not marshalling a player like Kaká. So bringing on Hamann made a huge difference to the team. And there were so many stories about, another story about halftime is Benitez had made a decision to start, what's his name? Jimmy Traore, who was a young fullback. He was French originally, and he came through the French system before he decided he was going to play for I think it was Mali. That was his heritage, and he was very much a player who he could be brilliant or he could be awful. There was kind of no in between. And he played in the first half and he had an absolute nightmare. And he was being brought off as well. He was going to be substituted for Hamann. And then what's happened was Liverpool's Irish fullback, Steve Finnan, had picked up an injury. And the story is that Traore was already in the shower, having been told he was substituted. And then the trainer or the physiotherapist told Benitez, Finnan can't go on. He's injured. So they had to pull Traore out of the shower. And actually, he ended up playing a key role in extra time. I think he made a vital interception or cleared off the line or something like that. And so there's all these little stories. What did Benitez say at halftime that changed things? And it's just going to be one of those games that will live in legend forever. And it wasn't just that they scored 3 goals in 6 minutes. You had that incredible save by Jerzy Dudak from Shevchenko.
From a yard.
Before the game was over, which was a point-blank range save. And then you got the penalty kicks where Dudak reprised the antics of Bruce Grobbelaar and the penalty kicks. So yeah, it's just a legendary game, and many rate it as the greatest European Cup final ever.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing the Jamie Carragher talk about that. He had an interview with Jaap Stam, who's a world-class defender back then as well, and he was talking about Carragher was basically asking Stam if they thought the game was over, because he even admitted that the team was not very good. It was an okay team, an average team that just kind of punched above its weight. And Stam said, no, we never thought the game was over. You guys hit us in the 6-minute span, 3 goals, and it really just kind of really shocked our system. And then Pirlo misses a penalty kick and Shevchenko misses. And I mean, it was unbelievable. Again, watching a replay, knowing what was happening, knowing what had happened, and still just being on the edge of my sofa, just, well, what a game.
Yep, as I say, it's just one of those legendary games.
Yeah. Well, a couple years later, in 06-07, AC Milan gets us back in Athens, and Inzaghi scores 2 goals, one kind of fortunate, the first one, and the second one, Poacher's goal. Kaut scores in the 89th minute to make it 2-1, but no heroics back in that game. What do you remember about that game?
Like the game 2 years earlier, I was living in Beverly by this time, up on the North Shore of Boston, and things had changed. All of the games were live now, and so you were able to watch it from home. And I guess the irony of this game was that Liverpool dominated, whereas 2 years earlier, Milan had been the dominant team. Liverpool had certainly improved. They had one of their best midfields ever in terms of Alonso and Gerrard was there, and had been joined by Mascherano. So that midfield trio was very dominant. And by that time, Benitez had put his stamp on the team, and they were well on their way to being an excellent team. So they dominated. But I guess Milan on the night just got us back. They maybe didn't have all the superstars of the previous occasion. Kaká was still there, but players like Shevchenko had been moved on. And looking at their team that day, they had a lot more Italian players playing for them.
Mm-hmm.
So both of the teams had changed quite a lot over the 2 years. What hadn't changed was the managers, and my memory of the game is as I say, that Liverpool dominated. Milan kind of sat in a little bit more, but but they got their revenge.
That brings us to Kiev in 2017-2018 season against Madrid. The only notes I have here is the Loris Karius horror show. And what's sad about that is it just seems like he never recovered as a goalkeeper, because when Liverpool brought him to Anfield, he had won goalie of the year for men's, I believe, in Germany. And he was a young up-and-coming goalkeeper, and really sad to kind of see somebody that wasn't able to kind of rekindle, his talents and reestablish himself as a goalie that can play at a high level. And that was a tough one to stomach.
Yeah, there's a lot of things about the Karius situation, because basically at that particular point, at that particular time, Liverpool had Simon Mignolet in goal, the Belgian goalkeeper, and Mignolet I think was a good shot stopper, but I don't think he was a great all-around goalkeeper.
Yeah, I agree.
And I guess that they brought in Karius. Well, obviously they scouted him, but even before the final, he'd never totally convinced in terms of his performances. Very up and down, very up and down. I can remember on the run that year that Liverpool beat Manchester City, and Liverpool won at Anfield 3-0. But I just remember a shot from one of the City players that was right at him, and he kind of, it was a hard shot, but it was right at him, and he kind of fumbled it, and it hit the crossbar. And that was very much the kind of goalkeeper that he was. But having said that, I think there's an asterisk goes beside it. Liverpool, I thought, played well in that game, even though there were some limitations to the team. I thought they played well. And there was the incident in the second half before the first goal when our old friend from Madrid, Sergio Ramos, gave Karius a good rap in the head. And of course, he'd already put his mark on Salah that day. So there is some suspicion that Karius had, was slightly concussed. Yeah. Obviously the first goal was was a terrible mistake where he kind of throws it against the legs.
Benzema.
Benzema, yeah. And then the third goal where he fumbles the shot from Bale. Couldn't do anything about the second one, clearly. But my memory of the game, and I'm trying to think where I was living in Ipswich at the time, I believe, was that Liverpool played well, but it'll always be overshadowed by the goalkeeping errors of Karius, as you say.
It's tough as a team, though, especially, a goal. I think goalies get too much blame and too much credit regarding on, goals, but it's difficult when you are playing a game and somebody is not having a good game, especially in a final. But I just remember, playing as a kid, and when a goalie was, not with it was tough, whether it was on your team or you see it on the other team. But when it's your team and everybody's playing hard and all, the goalie's just kind of giving up some softies, it's really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think the major thing that you brought up is Sergio Ramos, and I cannot stand him as a player. And I know he's a very good defender, but his antics and what he did in that game really just, I don't like him because of the tactics specifically in this game. But he used to try to do that to Messi against Barcelona. He was for being an actual very skilled defender, it was he did have this kind of nasty streak to him, and it really was awful for Salah, because that not only impacted him for the game, it impacted him for the World Cup, and he didn't really get his chance in the World Cup to really shine, and it was bad.
Right, yeah. It's well documented, Sergio Ramos and all his various comings and goings, as it were. But as I said earlier, he certainly made his mark very literally on that night, and I think it was a factor in the final result. But the bright spot, or the bright spark out of all of this, is I think it led to Liverpool making a change, which was signing the Brazilian goalkeeper Alisson Becker, and a quick return to a Champions League final
next year in Madrid. Against a well-known foe in Tottenham. I remember the semi-final against Manchester City, Manchester City. Raheem Sterling had scored a goal to send Manchester City ahead, and there was a long delay for an offside call, and when the offside call was made that Sterling's goal didn't count and Tottenham moved forward to the final, that was I remember watching that game more specifically than I do watching Liverpool's semifinal. Actually, that's not true. Liverpool's semifinal game was Barcelona in that year, which was fantastic. But Tottenham, Salah scores a penalty kick, and then Origi wins it for good late in the game.
Yes, yeah. I mean, again, it wasn't a great game. And the early penalty, I think, spoiled the game, unfortunately. And it's one of those decisions that I don't like in modern football, where to me it's a ball to hand decision, and sometimes they give them, sometimes they don't, and look. Salah scores, and it just seemed to ruin the game somehow, because Liverpool maybe played a little bit more conservatively than they would usually.
Origi's goal was nice though, left-footed across the grain and put it away. So that was really nice to see.
Yes, yeah, and of course Divock Origi, who's another one of those cult Liverpool players. I think he a very good player. I think his career at Liverpool was kind of stymied by that injury he received in a Merseyside derby, because he was going very, very well at that point. But having said that, he always seemed to crop up with a big goal or two for the club. And obviously the Champions League is the biggest of all.
And then a couple of years later in Saint-Denis, Parc des Princes, I think. Or that might be the French stadium, Stade de France, and against Madrid again, 1-0 loss on a Vinny Jr. goal, and I don't really have much. That game was pretty bad too.
First of all, I mean, for that game was overshadowed by crowd issues,
right?
Yeah, and it was to do with the marshalling of the crowd. It was to do with the French marshalling of the crowd. And so I was at a tournament that weekend. And so I was not expecting to be able to watch the game, because I had my own games. And so my son was sending me texts telling me that the game would be delayed. And then we had a major thunder and lightning shower. So I went into the car and was actually watching the game on the phone. Modern technology being what it is now. And it was very much a game where actually the game that we saw at the weekend had some similar characteristics, in as much as Dortmund took the game to Real Madrid. The goalkeeper plays well, like, to put it mildly.
Saw us too in that.
So the goalkeeper plays well. They don't take their chances. And in the second half, Milan score. Now, I thought, sorry, not Milan, Madrid score, but I thought that Madrid really got on top against Dortmund. They never really got on top against Liverpool. Like they scored the goal, but basically it was still Liverpool going forward, trying to break them down. Madrid's well set up, and in the end, they just couldn't break them down. And they may have all these great players, but at the same time, I would say that the current Real Madrid team isn't a dominating team in the sense of how they play against the opposition. I think Manchester City, Liverpool, they try to dominate their opponents. I think that when Madrid comes up against the very best teams, and you can give the manager credit for this, Ancelotti will do whatever it takes. They will play conservatively. They will sit in. They will show that side of their character because they have great defenders too. Like they really do.
Well, that takes the podcast to the 10-year run of the Champions League history of Liverpool Football Club. 6 wins, 4 losses, and 10 appearances. Pretty good record, really. I think if you did not know that and somebody told you we won 60% of our Champions League finals, I think people would say be okay with that. And Coach, what a run, from the beginning in 76, 77 against Mönchengladbach to, Istanbul to Kiev to Madrid, and even the loss in 2022 against Madrid.
Yeah, I mean, I think even though Liverpool hasn't won all of their finals, I think as a fan that we have to be fortunate that we've been to so many finals. I mean, I think many other clubs, I'm not sure how many finals that Manchester United have contested. How many times have they won it? 3 times, is it? And then they've lost a couple of finals against Barcelona. So 5 times. I think that they're the second most to Liverpool. So yeah, it's just a tournament. It's just a cup that's just had many great memories for the club.
Yeah, I think we do need to note the Barcelona situation in 1819. I falsely said that I don't remember who Liverpool played. It was very clear. I watched those highlights last night just to kind of remember that, and seeing the Barcelona fans stunned in Anfield, and even the players were just shocked. And the fact that Suarez was on the team, Coutinho was on the team, former Liverpool players that were sold to Barcelona, and really kind of turned everything around for Liverpool. Like you said, we did add Alisson and Van Dijk in that kind of time frame, and big difference, and propelled us to do great things moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. Back in the Champions League next year, so it'll be interesting to see how we do with a new manager.
Yeah, and there's going to be players coming in and players going out, so it's going to be very interesting to see Mr. Arne Slot's performance and how he manages a huge football club and how he does with our team. But I think overall we can see the consistency of Liverpool, whether they have a charismatic coach like Klopp or somebody that hasn't really proven themselves in a big stage or as big of a stage as Liverpool. But fun stuff to come for sure. Coach, thanks again for your insight on all the Champions League games or Champions League finals that Liverpool had played in. And Liverpool fans, we will have more stuff coming to you. We're trying to get creative on the content, but I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks again, everybody.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Liverpool fans, thank you so much for listening to the Liverpool Reaction, an American LFC podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and would greatly appreciate your support. Please leave a 5-star review and feel free to email us at tlrlfcpodcast@gmail.com. Looking forward to hearing from you. Till next time.